narrative form of truth. It's the same form of truth that you see presented in front of you when you go see movies, for example, or when you read great literature.
Well, movies are fiction. I mean,
yeah, but look, we wouldn't be able to rank order fiction in terms of its quality if it didn't bear some relationship to truth.
But I suppose, as you know, this show is aired right around the world, has millions of viewers who, of course, are not from a Christian tradition at all, not from any Western tradition. They may be Hindus, they may be Muslims, they may be animists. But how can they, therefore, relate to your 12 rules for life when they are so wedded to the culture and the traditions and the truths, as you would put it, of the Bible?
Well, I also draw on other traditions and extensively throughout the book and also in my first book, but the attitude that I'm taking towards the stories that our culture is predicated on is one that people from all over the world find engaging. So it's because these stories are deep enough and significant enough so that there's plenty of room at the table for everyone to have an intelligent discussion about them. And I'm not necessarily saying that I'm not saying at all that there isn't wisdom to be derived from other traditions, but I do see destabilization in our own culture about our fundamental values, and because our values, at least in part, were derived from Judeo-Christian writings, then it's useful, as far as I'm concerned, to return to them to discover what they mean.
All right, so we've heard from you your fear of totalitarianism as you see it evidenced in the 20th century. We also know that you regard the Bible as a foundation stone of your thinking. Here's what a fellow Canadian philosopher, Paul Thagard, has said about what he sees as the weakness in your argument. He says, Peterson assumes that the only alternative to religious morality is some form of totalitarianism or despondent nihilism. But secular ethics have flourished since the 18th century and even before. He talks about David Hume, Immanuel Kant, Jeremy Bentham. You don't seem to give any real importance to these sorts of secular ethicists.
I don't think that's true at all. I think that I have great respect for Enlightenment doctrines, and it's clearly the case that our current rather fortunate situation economically and politically is the consequence of something like a marriage between these old stories and the fundamental traditions that are in them and the Enlightenment doctrines upon which countries like England, for example, are founded. So, and I'm a scientist with many published works, and so I'm perfectly aware of, despite the criticisms of that particular philosopher, perfectly aware of the utility of a scientific and enlightened approach. But to think that humanistic values, let's say secular values, have flourished for a long time, and then to call that 200 years only means that philosopher and I have very different ideas about what a long time is.
Well, yeah,
I'm an evolutionary biologist, by the way, not a political philosopher, and so my time scale is thousands of years, not hundreds of years.
Yeah, your time scale is thousands of years, but I wonder how you then conceptualize the importance of change. You know, a lot of your work is about constancy and finding truths in the very deep past. But what about the importance of change? I mean, if one thinks about everything from the emancipation of women, equality for women, think about gay rights, think about civil rights. These are changes that we've seen in our societies in the last 50 years, and many people think that your philosophy actually has no real place for change at all.
Well,
it runs counter to change.
All that means is that they actually haven't read it, because one of the things that I point out very clearly in the book is that you have an internal guide to meaning. It's an instinct. It's a manifestation of something called the orienting reflex, which is a very deep instinct. And what it does is try to place you on the border between stasis and transformation, which is where you need to be, because in order to survive properly, you have to maintain your structure, but you have to update it in the face of constant challenge.
For people watching this, let's ask a basic question. If I were living in the late 19th century in the UK as a man, I may well have persuaded myself that the natural order of things is for men to have the vote and women not to. If you were living at that time with your regard for tradition and long-term eternal truths, you might well side with those who oppose the emancipation of women.
Well, assuming that my primary emphasis is on the maintenance of tradition, but like I said, it's not. My primary emphasis is on the ability for people to live in a context that's defined by active meaning. And so, for example, to the degree that we're engaging in a discussion here that is actually going to be meaningful to both of us and to the people who are watching it. What that will actually signify is that we've done a proper job of staying within a tradition that's sufficiently general so that we can all understand it, and sufficiently updating it at the same time.
But to stick with the equality for women then, and to stick with specifics, why do you argue that society today has been overly and dangerously feminized?
Well, because I see a backlash against masculinity, and a sense that there's something toxic about masculinity.
What is this idea of being why is society overly feminized?
Well, I didn't ever say that society was overly feminized. So if we're going to discuss my views, we should use my actual words. I believe that there's a danger in our society at the moment of making the assumption that our culture, for example, is a tyrannical patriarchy, which it is in some small part, and that any active engagement on the part of young men in particular is indistinguishable from an unacceptable power and dominance drive, which I don't believe.
But surely
all of that is inappropriate and incorrect.
If much of the power and authority over a very long historical period has lain with men, isn't it only inevitable that some men will get a little hacked off when women are given a stab at something approaching equality?
Well, that could be inevitable, but that doesn't make it right, and it's certainly not something that I support. So
So you think men's resentment is more important than women's effort to attain equality?
I'm not in favor of resentment at all. I think that if you're resentful, something's definitely wrong. Either you need to grow the hell up and take stock of your life, or you have some things to say to people that you haven't been saying.
You say science undoubtedly shows us that men and women have different traits, and there's a lot of science to back you up on that. But you say that because of that, men are hardwired to achieve success and to be successful in a way that women are not.
No, not at all. I've never said anything like that. I've said that there are biological differences between men and women that express themselves in temperament and in occupational choice, and that any attempt to enforce equality of outcome is unwarranted and ill-advised as a consequence.
And yet some of the most successful societies, judged on contentment indices or indeed material success, are those, for example, in Scandinavia.
Where the temperamental differences between men and women are larger than they are in any other society.
Well, so you say, you point out that in Scandinavia many more women choose to be health workers than engineers, for example.
It's not what I say, it's what the large-scale scientific investigation has revealed.
Fair enough. But equally, Scandinavia is full of societies, one could point to Norway, where they've made a specific legislative effort, for example, with a quota of 40% of women on corporate boards or a quota for women to be in parliament.
Right.
They've specifically engaged in social engineering, and it seems to be working, and it seems to be...
Doesn't seem to be working
well,
particularly.
forgive me, but Norway is top of every contentment index that we see across the world.
Well, okay, so first of all, Norway has plenty of oil money, which is definitely contributing to that. And second, it depends on what you mean by working. There's no evidence, for example, that the legislation that was designed to increase the number of women on boards has produced any movement whatsoever in the number of women who hold managerial and administrative positions in Norway. The theory was that as societies became more egalitarian, that men and women would become more the same. But that isn't what's happened. What's happened is the biggest differences between men and women now, temperamentally and in terms of their own interest, have manifested themselves in the Scandinavian countries. And so what that will mean is that men and women will make different choices in occupation if you let them have free choice. Now, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to stop that from happening? Is that the feminist perspective?
Let's get back to a word I used before and ask you directly. Do you approve of, do you think it's a dangerous word, equality? This word equality.
I approve of equality of opportunity, but I think that equality of outcome considerations are detestable and dangerous beyond belief.
So for you, whether it be gay rights campaigners, civil rights campaigners, or indeed women's rights campaigners, if they want to see equality deliverable in outcomes, they are damaging society, are they?
Well, it depends on how far they go with it. I mean, and how they measure it. I mean, these are very difficult technical issues, but if your a priori axiomatic assumption is that if there are differences in outcome, those are a consequence of patriarchal oppression, then it's a non-starter as far as I'm concerned, because there are multiple reasons for unequal outcome.
Do you think it was helpful for you to base a lot of your science about the difference between genders on lobsters?
Well, I haven't based any of my science about the difference between men and women
You
and
talk
lobsters.
about how lobsters and humans behave the same, and in that context you said girls aren't attracted to boys who are their friends, are attracted to boys who win status contests with other boys, and you describe that in the same breath as you describe how male and female lobsters behave.
It isn't me that makes those cases. That's a truism of evolutionary biology. If you one of the
Is it a truism of evolutionary biology that what we learn from lobsters can be applied to humans?
Well, some of it is, because the neurochemical structures are very, very similar. So, and it's also the case that one of the things.
I mean, I'm no expert, and I know that.
Yeah, but I am.
Yeah, and I know that you can command a lot of science that I cannot. But it just seems to me, on the face of it, to be somewhat bizarre to compare lobsters and humans given the different size of their brains.
It is bizarre. That's exactly why I did it, because I was trying to make the case that one of the chronic leftist criticisms of Western society is its hierarchical nature. And that's often put at the feet of, let's say, Western society, patriarchy, and the capitalist system. It's part of the Marxist critique. But hierarchies have been around for 350 million years. And so you can't place them at the feet of the Western political system. And they've been around for so long that our neurochemical systems have evolved to match their existence.
I mean, is it study of lobsters that's also one of the foundations for your belief that, you know, a mother and a father are crucially important to the raising of a child?
It's certainly the case that they're crucially important if you compare them to single parents, because all of the developmental literature indicates that the outcomes for children who have two parents are much better than the outcomes for children
and
who have
physical
one.
Punishment for children, efficacious as far as you're concerned?
Minimal necessary force is the proper principle for discipline in any sort of relationship, and you have to negotiate that with your child and with anyone else that you interact with.
You see,
and that's definitely the theme that motivates Chapter 5, which is called "Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them." So obviously, discipline for children is necessary, and negotiating how that's going to be done is very difficult.
It is interesting. I mean, you are an advocate, in essence, for toughening up, for, I mean, you say things like, you know, men have to, I don't know if you ever use the phrase, but others do, man up in a way that they consistently fail to do.
I usually mention that they should stop being pathetic weasels.
Pathetic weasels, yeah, right.
So I guess that would fall into the toughen up category.
So I suppose one odd thing about you and the way that the public debate around you has worked out is that you seem so brittle and thin-skinned about criticism.
Well, I suppose you might make that case, but I don't think that my media experiences have demonstrated that. I would say quite the contrary.
Well, your media experiences, your social media experiences do suggest that. One of the best-known critiques of your work from Pankaj Mishra in the New York Review of Books had you so angry. I mean, half the language that you used, I can't repeat, but you called him an arrogant, racist son of a you-know-what. Mm-hmm. You said that you would happily slap him if he was in the same room as you.
That's because he referred to a friendship I had with a native Canadian guy of several decades and said that I was romancing the noble savage, which I regarded as an indefensible statement. And if he had been on the right, you can be sure he would have been torn to shreds by the Twitter
What about
mob.
some of the values you tell all the rest of us that we must try to pursue? I mean, humility is one of them. You say you must assume the person you're listening to may know something you don't.
Yes, you should try to do that on the off chance that they can tell you something that
but you just see it an off chance, because
well,
you're pretty convinced. It was
an ironic comment. I'm more convinced that I would rather know some things that I don't know, and I do listen to people very, very carefully, just like I'm listening to you very, very carefully. And I do that because I would rather know some things that I don't know than be completely sure that what I already know is correct. That doesn't mean I won't defend my points, but I'm very good at talking to people and listening to them. I've been doing it for thousands and thousands of hours, and I've learned plenty from people that I've disagreed with.
Because your success is very striking. I just wonder, and you talk a lot about success and what leads to success. Has your success made your life more meaningful?
I would say yes, but it's...
In what ways?
Well, it's more intense. The stakes are higher. The impact is larger. The amount of responsibility I bear for what I say has increased, and the number of people that I'm affecting has grown immensely. And so all of that's associated with a deeper sense of meaning, but it's not without its cost. I have to be very careful for all sorts of reasons. And so I'm trying to be very careful and bearing in mind that what I'm saying is going to be disproportionately impactful. But I do believe, mostly from watching my audiences, let's say, in my public tours, that the primary effect that I'm having is in helping individuals establish themselves more firmly in their personal and public lives, and that's working very well.
Jordan Peterson, we have to end there, but I thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
My pleasure.
The left had been completely booted out of politics.